Hi, everybody. Today I want to talk about developing the chain of reasoning within your dissertation. This is a concept that comes from Crothwell and Smith 2005, and I just wanted to talk you through what they discuss as far as chain of reasoning and what that looks like within your dissertation. I'm going to include the reference for you, and then I'm also including in the comments below, I'll include a link to the materials so you can access worksheets and more detailed information that they have on how to develop your chain of reasoning. So let's talk a little bit about what a chain of reasoning actually is. So the end goal of research that produces or supports generalization is the development of a carefully constructed chain of reasoning. The write-up of the proposal should follow a logical, deductive sequence of presentation. So there's a logic to how you present your information, and it's sequential. Each of the links in the chain successfully develops a logical path from the onset of the study to the presentation of the findings. So what this means is as you start working through the literature and developing your argument and the reason for your study and the justification, the rationale for your approach, there's a chain of, I don't want to call it events, but there's a chain of logic, chain of reasoning that begins with that review of literature and filters all the way down through your dissertation. So let's look at what that actually looks like. This is a recreation of the figure, the chain that Crothwell and Smith defined in the materials that are out there on the internet. This diagram or this illustration is a little bit fuzzy, so I just wanted to recreate it just to make it a little bit clearer. But you can kind of see, starting from the top and working your way down, there's a series of links to this chain. So let's talk a little bit about each one. So we start at the top, and your first link is linked to previous research. This is where your study idea originates. You've done your reading, you've gone out into the research, you've looked at what is known, what is not known, where the gaps are in the existing research, where researchers are pointing to needs for additional study. This is where your study idea originates. From there, based on how much research is available, you can begin to start to narrow down the type of study that you're going to do and the rationale for your study. So here is where you define or explain the reason that you're doing this study. What's the rationale? What theory, if you're trying to develop a theory, or what your point of view is related to the gap or the problem that you've identified. Okay, so once you have this understanding of what's happening in the previous research and you understand the problem that your study is going to address, then you can narrow it down to what are the questions or the hypotheses that you're trying to answer in your study. So from all of the previous links, now you can focus the attention of your study specifically on the research questions or the hypotheses that you want to address. Okay, once you have those, then you can clearly define the design. This is going to be based on the research question that you're trying to address, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, and then the design within either one of those. Once you understand the design, you understand the questions that you're going to attempt to answer in your study, then you can detail out the procedures, the who, what, when, where of the study. In Crothwell and Smith, they break down this section here in the middle between procedure and data, and they dig in a little bit more to show you all the different pieces and the links that connect the procedure to the data. So they talk about the who, your target population, the instruments, how you're gathering the data. That kind of information links the procedure to the actual data that's collected. Okay, I'm not going to go into that here because I just want to introduce you to the chain of reasoning and introduce you to Crothwell and Smith, and you can go and read more of what they've written about this chain. Once you have the procedure, that leads to how you carry out gathering the data. And then once you have the data, you have to reduce the data through analysis in order to understand the results. Because when you get your data, especially quantitative, there's so much there that you can't really make a determination or make any inferences until you go through and do analysis and come to a conclusion. Okay, and that all of that leads to the study conclusion. Okay, so you can see how each of the links connect to one another. They build off of one another, and it's almost like they funnel down. So you have all this research that's out there, it funnels down into the problem space that you've identified, which then funnels down into the research questions, which then clearly should define your design, your procedure, and how you analyze the data, and then what conclusions you come to. Okay? Now, if you take this chain of reasoning and you map it to how your dissertation lays out, and this is based on how GCU or Grand Canyon University requires their dissertations to be built out. The first two links are really defined in Chapter 2, which is all about your review of the literature, your explanation of the problem space, your theoretical framework. All of that information is contained in Chapter 2, which then feeds into Chapter 3, which talks about here's the research questions, here's the target population, any instrumentation or data collection methods like interviews, focus groups if you're doing a quantitative study. Chapter 3 breaks down all of that information. Chapter 4 is where you show your results of your data collection and break down the analysis and what the analysis of the data is telling you. And then Chapter 5 is where you talk about the conclusions, talk about your contributions to future research or to practical work, and you link to any next studies, so future recommendations that you might have or future practice. The thing that I find really interesting is how Crothwell and Smith talk about the chain analogy and why they chose that analogy over. They don't really discuss it, but you could also look at like a funnel or like a spiral staircase or, a stair step. But here's why they chose the chain analogy, and I think this is really interesting. Each link in the chain determines the nature of the next link. Okay, so we talk about you need to understand the existing research, and then that will give you kind of a rationale for your problem space, which will then lead to the research questions that you want to answer, which will then lead you to the design and the procedure and the appropriate analysis of that data. So each of those builds on one another. Secondly, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So you need to think about how you are providing the rationale and justifying your approach for each of the different pieces. So when you get to your procedure, you want to make sure that that link is as strong as possible and that it's justified based on the problem space that you're trying to address and what the existing literature is telling you. Each link, I can't talk now, each link should have the same strength. And in a metal chain where links share the load, one of those links could be made stronger in order to compensate for weakness in another. And where they're specifically talking about that is here between procedure and data, where it's talking about there's multiple links that are kind of connecting procedure to data. If one of those links is weaker, you can bulk it up. So for example, you have really strong instrumentation. It's valid, it's reliable, but maybe how you're going to access your target population is a weaker link. So you can bulk it up by having really valid, reliable instruments to make that link a little bit stronger, if that makes sense. Okay, so the chain analogy is really interesting, and I love how Crothwell and Smith have put it together. And I just wanted to share with you the chain of reasoning because I think it's really important as you're putting together your work that you're connecting all of the dots in your chain of reasoning, that they are aligned, that you are connecting what you found with the research to the problem space, and that your research questions support the problem that you're trying to address in your study. And then your design and procedures then support the research questions. Okay, so I will put links in for you to access Crothwell and Smith. Here is the reference information that you can go and look for yourself. They do have some interesting worksheets that you can look at that may be useful. and good luck writing your dissertation. I will see you in the next video.